Hello, Dr. Watson here again. And let me tell you what, I am so excited about this new series that starts with this episode, where I am going to dive into marketing fundamentals using the business headlines and business dramas from the last 12 to 24 months. I understand that just because you are an MBA student does not mean that you have a business background. I have lots of students who are coming from engineering, computer science, healthcare, and nursing. And so you've maybe never worked in a traditional business setting, especially in a marketing capacity. And so you probably don't have a very good grasp of the marketing fundamentals. And that's okay. Did you know that there are billionaire activist investors running hedge funds and businesses buying stocks of companies whose marketing fundamentals they don't seem to fully understand? Today, that is exactly one of the sagas that we are going to dive into to help understand and uncover the marketing fundamentals that are at play. In January of 2022, Bill Ackman, who is the billionaire investor, founder, and CEO of Pershing Square Capital, said that Pershing Square was all in on streaming and purchased 3.1 million shares of Netflix for $1.1 billion. It is important for you to know that Pershing Square Capital's investment strategy is to only hold about a dozen companies in their portfolio at a time. That means that they should really understand the ins and outs of the business models of those 12 companies that they are holding, right? There's kind of no excuse. It's not like they have a portfolio of 500 companies. Instead, they're doing their research, supposedly, and they really understand what they're getting as they're going all in with that dozen or so companies that makes up their multi-billion-dollar portfolio. Okay, well, in January, he goes all in. $1.1 billion buy of Netflix. By April, so less than 3 months later, he sells the shares. He sells the 3.1, loses the bet on them, and takes a loss of $400 million. At the time, he actually said, while Netflix's business is fundamentally simple to understand, in light of recent events, we have lost confidence in our ability to predict the company's future prospects with a sufficient degree of certainty. Now, I ask you this. Did the fundamentals of Netflix's business actually change that much between January and April? No, they did not. And why? Going to show you right now the main marketing fundamental concepts that were driving some of the reason as to why Netflix went on sale. Okay, so it all started because they lost subscribers. That had never happened in a decade, right? And so now all of a sudden, this company that has just been growing, isn't growing anymore and is actually losing subscribers. Oh, well, you want to know what? Marketing fundamentals actually predict that happening. There are a couple of things. There is a model called the customer adoption curve. And with the customer adoption curve, you actually know what percentage of customers who are ever really going to make up your target audience, the order in which they are going to adopt whatever product or service you are offering. So, innovators are going to be those very first ones. So these are the people who, right now they have the AR and the VR goggles, and anytime any new technology comes out, they're the very first people who ever have it. You may remember whenever Google tried their Google Glasses, it was by invitation only for a little while. Those are innovators, right? And then you move from that into early adopters, and then early majority, and then late majority, and then laggard. Not only do we have the customer adoption curve, but thanks to Everett Rogers, we also have the diffusion of innovation curve. This basically just overlays a graph that shows market share or market saturation as more of the types of customers in the customer adoption curve adopt the new innovation, right? So at the time that Netflix kind of put Blockbuster out of business, and they were the first to introduce the world to the concept of streaming, Okay, so by the time that late majority customers adopt the innovation and then we get into the laggards, you're at like 100% market saturation. Well, guess what? This was actually talked about in the media right before Bill Ackman made his big $1.1 billion purchase. A few days before that big purchase, right after the report had come out, there was actually an article. All of these are linked, by the way. Everything that I'm referencing is linked in the video description. But there was an article, the headline said, "There's no one left to sign up for Netflix." Why? There comes a certain point in time in a company's product life cycle. Oh, wait, there's another marketing foundational concept that is at play here. Every product, every company, every brand has a product life cycle that research has shown for decades. We really understand the flow of this product life cycle. So, if you take into consideration the customer adoption curve and where we were, where Netflix was in the customer adoption curve, and the diffusion of innovation, right? It's not like this is a super new innovation now. It's been out for over a decade. And then you combine that with product life cycle, you can see that there is a point at which a company peaks whenever they mature and then begin the decline, right? And so this headline, "There's no one left to sign up for Netflix," that was a pretty good indicator. Now, they didn't use the marketing fundamental concepts, but they got the idea that, hey, there comes a certain time when as many people are going to sign up for Netflix in the United States have already signed up for Netflix, right? We see this same sort of competition with the insurance companies, right? That's why you see all those insurance companies all the time between Liberty Mutual, Allstate, State Farm, Geico, Progressive. Why? The pie isn't getting any bigger. The number of people who are going to purchase insurance, that number is not growing. So instead, what's happening is each player within the insurance pie, they're having to duke it out. They are having to fight for a slightly bigger piece of the pie. Kind of the same thing has happened with Netflix, right? The pie is not growing anymore. There are not a whole bunch more people still left out there to subscribe. Instead, the pie has actually gotten more competitive, right? Because whenever Netflix first started and they were at the beginning of the product life cycle, they were the only streaming player. There really was no competition. But since then, we've seen Disney Plus, we've seen Paramount, obviously HBO Max, that is now just Max, Hulu, which is actually part of the Disney portfolio of brands. We'll talk about that in a future episode. And then you also have like YouTube, right? So Google owns YouTube, and YouTube has become kind of in its own right a really big deal. Oh, and then we also have Apple TV and Amazon Prime. So the landscape is nothing like it was whenever Netflix put Blockbuster out of business. It is now a mature industry, and Netflix is a mature company acting in a much more mature industry. And so, by very nature of the customer adoption curve, the diffusion of innovation model, and the product life cycle, it's really quite obvious that that first dip in subscribers, especially in the United States market, is to be expected. And unless you figure out a way to start the product life cycle over, the only thing that happens is decline, right? And so that's why in the news report, whenever Ackman was like, so turns out there's kind of a high degree of uncertainty now as to whether this business model that we were all in only 3 months ago, whether it's actually super viable. Because as you have increased competition and pretty much market saturation, unless you can figure out how to start that product life cycle over, then all you're facing is declines. And the only thing that Netflix had said was, hey, we're going to introduce ads and we're going to start charging people for password sharing. Okay, we're going to talk about those strategies in a future episode and whether those were smart strategies or whether they were going to pay off strategies or not. But essentially, is that really starting the product life cycle over if all you're doing is introducing ads, or cracking down and getting incrementally a little bit more money by not allowing people to share their password anymore? This is a completely different situation than a company like Apple, right? Apple is brilliant in how they start the product life cycle over all of the time. As soon as there's market saturation for the iPhone 13 or for the iPhone 14, what happens? They release a new model and start the product life cycle over again. Just whenever there's kind of market saturation with the Apple Watch, then what do? Oh, all of a sudden, there's a new one that is released and it starts the product life cycle over again. So unless Netflix actually produces some new innovation that customers are going to buy that starts the product life cycle over again, you're dealing with product life cycle peak and decline. So I'll end by asking, is Netflix the new Blockbuster? Dun dun dun. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will continue to find out.